Would you ask Mr. Blake to come back, please? Right, Mr. Rigg?
Thank you.
Yes, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Blake, I just wanted to go back to a topic we looked at before the lunch break, which was Carl Stokes. And there's a document that I should have shown you this morning, but I want to show you now. Can you look, please, at CST 401284? This is an email at the bottom of the page that I think you won't have seen before between Carl Stokes and the TMO from April 2017. It's from Carl Stokes to Janice Ray. And Carl Stokes says to Janice Ray, Grenfell was clad, but the cladding complied with the requirements of the building regulations. Lots of questions asked of Rydons and answers received back from them. Did you receive questions from Mr. Stokes? Do you remember?
About the cladding? No, I don't remember that.
Well, Mr. Stokes is saying that lots of questions were asked of Rydons in the context of the cladding complying with the building regulations. Do you remember receiving any questions from Mr. Stokes about whether the cladding complied with the building regulations?
No, I don't.
Do you remember providing any advice or answers to Mr. Stokes about whether the cladding complied with the building regulations?
No, I don't.
To your knowledge, did anyone from Rydon give Mr. Stokes any assurances regarding the compliance of the cladding system with the building regulations?
I don't know whether they did.
I'd like now to turn to the topic of FR5000, which was one of the insulation products to be used on Grenfell Tower, and in the end was changed to RS5000, but there was no product change. Can I ask you to look, please, at SEA 50169 at page 73? This is the NBS specification, and specifically that part of it, which specifies, or specified, FR5000 as insulation for use at Grenfell Tower. If we look at paragraph 776 in this section dealing with H92 range green cladding, we can see there that the thermal insulation was stipulated as rigid PIR insulation board, manufacturer Celotex. Did you see that?
Okay.
Yes. Did you read the specification, and specifically this part of it, at any point during your involvement with the Grenfell Tower project?
I can't recall that.
Right. You can't recall that. You can see just a little bit lower down that the product reference there is FR5000 aluminium foil faced both sides. When did you first become aware that FR5000 was the insulation product originally stipulated for use on the tower?
After the fire.
I see. Were you familiar during your involvement with the project with FR5000 as a product?
No.
Does it follow from that you had no views one way or the other about its combustibility?
That's correct.
Did you ever discuss this product with anybody? Or have anybody mention it to you or ask to discuss it with you?
During the project?
During the project, yes.
No, I didn't, no.
Can I ask you about Kingspan Cooltherm K15 insulation? Are you aware that although, as we can see here from this page, the NBS specification provided for the use of Celotex FR5000, a quantity of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 was also installed on the building as insulation? Did you know that at the time?
I didn't know that. Well, from the previous evidence is that I'm aware of that, and I was made aware that there was an amount at the end of the project that was used on the building.
Well, you say previous evidence. Are you referring to the evidence given to this inquiry?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Well, let's just explore that a little bit. Can I ask you to be shown RYD 30942213 at page 10, please? Now, this is David Hughes's witness statement, and I'd like to look at paragraph 55. He says, in December 2015 or January 2016, I discussed with Ben Bailey and agreed the use of Kingspan, as Harley's had difficulty obtaining Celotex from their supplier. As far as I was concerned, Kingspan and Celotex are similar products with similar insulation properties. As far as Ben and I were concerned, it was a like-for-like swap of insulating material. I told Steve Blake and the clerk of works, John White, of this use of Kingspan insulation material. Do you remember having a conversation with Mr. Hughes about swapping RS 5000 for Kingspan Cooltherm K15?
But prior to this being raised, it wasn't part of my recall, but this is something that happened, so I agree with that.
You agree with it, right?
Yes.
Did David Hughes, do you remember, ask you whether it was acceptable to use the Kingspan product?
I don't recall the exact exchange.
Do you recall whether he was simply... I see, so you don't recall the exchange. I mean, from your recollection, you accept, I think, what Mr. Hughes is saying here. Are you accepting what he's saying here, namely that he told you of the use because he remembers it, or are you telling us that you have your own independent recollection of that discussion?
His statement has prompted my recall, and I don't disagree with what he's put down here.
Right. So do you have a recollection of your own of discussing this matter with Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, but I don't know exactly what we discussed.
Right. Okay. Can you remember this much? Was he asking you for permission to use it, or is he asking you, or just telling you that it was being used?
He would be informing me of this this event, and I would hope that he's telling me that it is an equivalent material. So that's that seems perfectly a correct note of what we spoke about.
So your recollection is that he told you it was an equivalent material. I just want to be clear about your
Yes,
recollection.
I would. Yeah, I would say that's what I was told.
Equivalent in what respect? Do you remember?
In all respects.
Do you know the basis on which Mr. Hughes could have known how Cooltherm K15 could have been equivalent to the Celotex in all respects?
I don't know that, no.
When this discussion occurred in December 2015 or January 2016, had the product already been ordered? Do you remember?
I don't recall.
Do you know whether it was on site?
It may have been.
Now, Mr. Hughes says that as far as he was concerned, and I've just shown you this in his statement, Kingspan and Celotex are similar products with similar insulation materials, and that it was a like-for-like swap. Did you have your own view about whether that product was indeed a like-for-like swap with Celotex, or did you just take it on trust from him?
I took that as read.
Right. Did you know that this product, Kingspan K15, or, well, let me ask you a prior question. Did you understand when he referred to Kingspan that he was referring to Kingspan Cooltherm K15?
No, it was the same material from a different manufacturer.
Did you know that Kingspan is a PUR, polyurethane rigid foam, whereas Celotex RS5000, as it had become, is a polyisocyanurate, PIR?
No, I did not.
Right. Did you take any steps to satisfy yourself that Celotex and Kingspan were like-for-like materials?
No, I didn't, and I should have done.
You say you should have done. What, in hindsight?
Yes.
Did you or anyone else at Rydon talk directly to Kingspan about the suitability of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 on this building?
No.
So it would follow from that that you never sought any information or documentation as to the fire performance of this product on this building?
No, I assumed, without personally checking, that it was a like-for-like product. It was the end of the install when the mast climbers were coming down. My recall, it was for an extremely limited amount. That doesn't excuse not checking it out. But in the context of the whole, it was for infilling the gaps left on the building with the removal of the mast climber fixings.
Did you see where this Kingspan was being put on the building at the time?
Exactly what I've just described is where I understood it to be used.
Do you remember seeing any gaps in any particular places? For example, the east elevation?
Only where the mast climber fixings were removed. That's where I understood it was going to be used.
Right. I see. Okay.
So as they were being taken off the building.
I'm assuming that you never asked to see the BBA certificate for Kingspan for this product.
I don't think I did, and I can't recall.
Well, let me just see if I can show you a document to see if it prompts a recollection. KIN 3014639, please. Now, this is the BBA certificate for Kingspan insulation, first issued on the 8th of October 2015. See that?
Yes.
And it says in the middle of the page, behaviour in relation to fire, the product is classified as CS1D0 in accordance with BSEN 13501. Does this prompt a recollection that you saw this at the time? December 15, no. January 16? No. Were you familiar with this document at all at the time, do you think?
Not at the time, no.
Were you aware, or did you consider, that the substitution of RS5000 for Cooltherm K15 might have had an impact on whether the facade design as a whole complied with the building regulations?
I would have worked on the basis that it was being suggested as an alternative, on the basis that it was equivalent in every respect.
So that was an assumption that you would have made, which you didn't explore?
That's right.
Did you consider checking back with the contract that you had with the TMO to satisfy yourself that when this substitution was made, there was nothing that you should be doing to make sure it was safe?
I would know that from previous experience. If there's a change that's suggested, it needs to be verified.
What steps were taken to your knowledge to verify?
I've said that there weren't.
Can you account for that failure?
No.
Given that this product, K15, was not on the NBS spec and it was a substitute, it appears that no advice was taken from a fire safety expert, such as Exova, or indeed any fire safety engineer, to verify whether it was safe. Can you explain why that was?
Same reason as I've already said.
Do you accept that before accepting the product as an equivalent substitute, you should have made those inquiries?
What should have done is present the choice to the architect. It's been given to us by the specialist contractor as an equivalent, and then I should have run a process via the architect just to double check. But I've accepted on the basis that it's given to me by our specialist, who is employed with that obligation, that I would have passed it to the architect for them to check.
Now, we've already discussed some parts of the contract, and I think we've seen that the contract with the TMO provided that Rydon wouldn't substitute any materials specified in the employer's requirements without the prior written consent of the TMO. We saw that yesterday. Did you notify the TMO or seek the TMO's approval for the use of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 on the building?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
For the same reason.
Well, you should have done, but what is the reason why you didn't?
You've said I said I haven't done it, so.
And I'm just trying to get to the bottom of why
There is no reason as to why I wouldn't do that. It's at the there's I can't give a reason why not, because that's what I should have done.
All right. Did building control ever receive any drawing or specification that provided written confirmation that Kingspan K15 was being proposed as insulation material in this bill?
No, they
project?
didn't.
Is there any reason why that was the case?
For the same reason.
Can I just look at your statement, RYD 30094225, page 14, please, and look at the second line at the top of the page. This is paragraph 9.1. And in the first full sentence there, you say, building control were provided with all that they requested as part of their process for satisfying themselves that the work was compliant. Building control certified that the building was compliant with building regulations. Now, in the light of your evidence there, given that building control weren't aware of the substitution of Kingspan Cooltherm K15, do you know how they would have known to request information in respect of it?
They wouldn't have done.
So therefore, how could you rely on building control certification that the building was compliant with building regulations if you hadn't told them about the substitution of the insulation and they hadn't considered it?
By going back to the first part, is that I understood from the specialist contractor that it was an equal or approved product for the quantum of it is no excuse for not doing that, but for a very limited area at the completion of the project.
Just following up on that answer, you say, I understood from the specialist contractor that it was an equal or approved product. By specialist contractor, do you mean Harley?
Yes, I do. Yeah, that's.
Did anyone from Harley tell you that Kingspan K15 was an equivalent, or was an equal or approved product?
That's going back to Dave's statement.
I see. Coming back to my question again, though, how could you rely on building control certification that the building was compliant with the building regulations in circumstances where you knew that building control had not been provided with information about the substitution of RS 5000 with Kingspan K15 cool therm?
I relied on the basis that I believed that product was compliant.
No, that doesn't quite answer my question. If you're looking at your statement, you say building control were provided with all that they requested as part of their process for satisfying themselves that the work was compliant. My question is, how could you rely on building control certifying and satisfying themselves that the work was compliant when you knew they hadn't had all the information? And particularly, as I say, the information that Kingspan Cool Therm K15 was going on the building.
I would still rely on it in the same way. I believe that product to be compliant. So therefore, it would be compliant.
Well, you might think it was compliant.
Well, I
Let's
was told
assume
that
that,
it was.
but you would know that building control wouldn't have had all the information, and therefore you couldn't rely on building control because you would know building control didn't have the information. That must be right, no?
Sorry, I don't see why I wouldn't think that.
Right. Different topic, cavity barriers at Chalcots and Ferrier Point. Do you remember there was a fire at Taplow House on the Chalcots estate in January 2012?
I do.
And you were the contract manager for that project, I think, weren't you? As you
I
told
was.
Yes. What was your involvement in dealing with that incident? Just in headline terms.
I was informed by the client that there'd been a fire in the property, and they asked me to visit site, which I did. We have an ongoing maintenance obligation after the refurbishment works, and part of that remit was to assist with the immediate clear up, and then thereafter the reinstatement of the area damaged by the fire.
Right. Now, can we look at HAR 301069, please? This is Harley's incident report from that fire. And we can see that it's dated the 17th of January 2012, and those present included you. And from the introduction, we can see that it had started with a telephone call from Steve Blake, Rydon Construction, to Tim Lovell, Contracts Manager, and Ray Bailey, Director, on the 17th of January 2012. It was confirmed that a fire did indeed take place to the inside of a flat 123 on the 17th floor to Taplow House. And you can see in the second sentence that the new facade also consisted of additional fire breaks and rock wool insulation. Do you remember alerting Harley to the fire?
Yes.
Look at page 4, please, of that document, and I just want to look with you at the words in the middle of the page. Now, first of all, you can see as a photograph with a gentleman pointing. Is that you?
It is.
Right. And then underneath it, it says, it was evident that despite the fire and the amount of flammable items in the flat, such as paper, etc., the fire breaks were still intact and prevented the fire spreading between flats. The Harley-designed fire break system is visible. Now the surrounding fabric has melted under the extensive heat. We can see you pointing. What are you pointing to?
That's to the head of the window where the fire break was located.
When you say fire breaks, do you mean cavity barriers?
Yes. Yeah.
You don't sound sure.
I know there was a debate about the definition of the description. So that is, it's. I would put it as a fire break, and it is a barrier. It is a barrier across a cavity.
Right.
So, but either can be applied to this. What's been referred to.
What do you mean either? What does fire break mean in addition to cavity barriers?
The arrangement of Camden is not is dissimilar to Grenfell.
Well, just in terms of terminology, fire break. What does it mean?
It's a means of stopping fire from one compartment to another.
Can we look at CEP 403223, please? CEP 403223. This is an abseil survey for the same incident. Are you familiar with this document?
I am.
Yes. And let's just look at the distribution list on the next page, please, page 2. You can see that you're head of the distribution list there, as are Ray Bailey and Daniel Anketel-Jones from Harley, and others from Harley as well, like Mark Stapley. This is dated the 23rd of January 2012. And if you look, please, at the distribution list in total, you can see you're the only Rydon representative on that list. Did you distribute it more widely within Rydon when you got it, do you think?
I would have thought so, yes. I can't recall precisely, but I would think so, yes.
To whom within Rydon do you think, doing the best you can, you distributed it?
It would have gone to the legal team. There would have been to put insurers on notice, and I would have reported it to Jeff as a matter of course anyway. So and to the people on the who are administering the maintenance contract.
Did you have a system? Did Rydon have a system in place to ensure that documents such as this were circulated amongst people who needed to see them?
It would go to whoever was needed to see it.
Did you have a system of ensuring that important lessons arising from events like Taplow House became the subject of an established practice within Rydon? Lessons learned?
There was always opportunity for lessons learned. Not necessarily a prescriptive formal system, but
Okay, let's look at the document. If you go to the bottom of page 1 in the introduction, you can see in the second paragraph in the page there it says the damage is recorded as having been extensive. You see that? Sorry, the end of the first paragraph. And then look at the third line of the second paragraph. The severity of the fire completely destroyed the living room window. However, the fire was contained from spreading to over floors by the extensive fire breaks located at the head and sill of each window. Smoke damage caused further damage to the external cladding and cavity. Does that accord with your recollection?
This is Harley's report that they've produced.
Yes, does it accord with your recollection?
I didn't do the report, so
No.
I don't know what you're asking me.
Well, we saw from the Rydon document that you had been on site.
Yes.
And had seen the damage, and specifically around the windows, because you confirmed that it was you pointing. My question is, does the Harley report, in the passages I've just read to you, correspond with your recollection?
It does, but they're making a a statement about containment. The fire went out because the fire brigade put it out.
Let's go to page 2 at the top there. Sorry, 2 at the bottom, I should say. If we go to 2 at the bottom, this is where it says the fire was contained from spreading over floors by the extensive fire breaks located at the head and sill of each window. Do you disagree with that conclusion?
Well, that was part of the process, but that's a statement they're making. They've been asked to provide a report, but I'm reading that, and the fire was put out by the fire brigade.
Let's go to page 14, please. Let's look at the text at the top. You can see in the second line there, the conclusion that Hardy reaches, the fire barrier prevented the spread of fire into the internal space. Now this is in context, in a particular location. That's the conclusion. And if we can turn over to page 15, we see the conclusion to the document. And let's just look at the third paragraph. It is, however, apparent that the design of the facade and fire stops has unquestionably worked well, and as despite the severe heat, the extremes of the damage have been compartmentalised within the flat, and a progressive tower block fire has not occurred. The actions of all involved, from designers, building users, fixing teams and fire brigade, may have saved lives and has led to the facade remaining physically intact. In many ways, this has been a success for all concerned. Now, I know you didn't write the report, but to your way of understanding it, when you read it, did fire breaks, fire barriers and fire stops all mean the same thing, or did they mean different things?
In the context of this report, the same thing.
Is that cavity barriers?
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, just pausing there, would you agree that anyone reading this document would consider that the use of cavity barriers around the windows had been a critical factor in stopping the fire spreading from the flat in which it started to the rest of the building?
As part of it, yes, definitely.
Do you agree with the conclusion set out in that third paragraph there that I've read to you?
Yeah, there's no reason not to agree with that.
Would you also agree, therefore, that as a recipient of this report, and indeed as the sole representative who actually attended Taplow House after the fire, you had first-hand knowledge of the importance of cavity barriers to the prevention of fire spread in high-rise overclad buildings such as Taplow House by the time you began work on the Grenfell Tower project?
Indeed, yes.
And in particular, you had first-hand knowledge of the importance of cavity barriers around windows.
Yes, I did, yes.
Did the Taplow House fire cause you to consider whether insulation, which was of limited combustibility, should be used above 18 metres?
No, it didn't.
Did the Taplow House fire cause you to consider whether ACM panels, whether riveted or faced fixed, with a PE core, were suitable for residential buildings above 18 metres?
No, it didn't.
Did you, having read this report, have reason to think that a great deal depended upon the proper and effective installation of cavity barriers around the windows as a means of saving lives in circumstances where ACM polyethylene panels were used?
I knew that was, part of the strategy, compartmentalising for the arrangement, yes.
And would you accept that given the importance of cavity barriers around the windows in order to prevent external fire spread, Rydon was contractually obliged, or is this your understanding at the time, contractually obliged to provide cavity barriers around the windows at Grenfell Tower?
That was the design development that had taken place on that contract.
I don't understand that. I'm sorry, I'm afraid.
Well, that was the design that was finalised and installed on that contract. So,
which contract?
The Camden one.
I see. That's not an answer to my question, I'm afraid. I'm going to ask it once more. Given the importance of cavity barriers around the windows in order to prevent external fire spread, was it your understanding at the time that when Rydon entered into its contract with the TMO, it was obliged to provide cavity barriers around the windows at Grenfell?
I didn't necessarily know that. I knew that there was the requirement to provide protection at compartments. So that was my understanding.
How many prior to the start of the Grenfell Tower project and your involvement in it, how many incidents like the one at Taplow House had you experienced?
What, a full-blown fire?
A full-blown fire affecting a rain screen cladding?
That's my only experience of that.
Yeah. In the light of that sole experience at Taplow House, did you ever think to check the designs of the windows and ensure that proper cavity barriers were provided for in those designs to ensure that if a fire did break out, the same degree of protection would be afforded at Grenfell as experience had shown you had been afforded at Taplow House?
I'm not the designer of anything. So at Grenfell, that was the commission of Harley's, Studio E, and to building control.
Well, let me qualify the question. In the light of your sole experience at Taplow House, did you ever think to check with Studio E or Harley that proper cavity barriers were provided for in their designs, so as to be sure that if a fire did break out, the same degree of protection would be afforded at Grenfell as experience had shown you it had been afforded at Taplow House?
I didn't do that with them, no.
Why not, given the experience that you'd had at Taplow?
Because I relied on Harley's in particular. If the notation from their report here would show me that they see it as particularly important, so why would they not apply the same level to the work they're doing at Grenfell? I had no reason to think that the design that they that was evolved and developed through the exchanges through the design team would not be appropriate.
I understand that, Mr. Blake, but I'm just asking you from your own experience why you thought it sufficient simply to rely on Harley's and let them get on with it in circumstances of your own personal experience and involvement at Taplow House.
Well, at the point in time when this design development was occurring, I wasn't fulfilling the contracts manager's role on the project.
In very general terms, did you know that ACM would be gone rather quickly in a fire if there was a fire on the exterior?
I did not know that.
Can I ask you slightly different topic now. Can I ask you to go, please, to ART 406641? And this is a set of emails in March 2015. And I'd like you to go to page 2 and look at the bottom of that page. This is an email from Matt Smith of Max Fordham to Claire Williams of the TMO on the 17th of March. You need to go to page 2, please, and look at the bottom of page 2. Yes. And afternoon, Claire, he says, we've been round the houses with this a bit already. Now, you're not copied in on this, I should just say. There appears to be some confusion with JS Rydon. So would you be able to explicitly state which flats the TMO requires to be lifetime homes compliant, whether these flats are to be fully compliant, i.e. mid-level TRVs, consumer unit, etc., and then which flat or flats is disabled access and what requirements the TMO has for it, LST radiators, etc. Now, if we move up then to the top of that page, Claire Williams tells Mr. Smith on that day, Matt, if Rydon do not know what is in the contract, then they should raise an RFI so there can be a formal response within a time frame. The question is, were you aware that the TMO at this time thought that Rydon might not understand its contractual obligations?
I would imagine that we're asking a question because it's not clear.
Do you accept it was your job to be aware of concerns such as this if they existed?
I see this as a simple request for information that would be dealt with by the project team.
Right. Let's move to page 1. We can see Neil Reed of Artelia's response to Matt Smith on the 19th of March. And he also sends it to Claire Williams. Now, you're not copied in. Again, I should just draw that to your attention. But in the second paragraph, Mr. Reed says, Matt, I appreciate we haven't spoken yet, but looking forward to working with you and introducing some improved discipline by Rydon to the resolution of queries, decisions, etc. You'd be very welcome to attend the meeting, so by copy to Nick, I will ask him to invite you so we can meet and discuss project status quo. I just want to ask you about the improved discipline brackets by Rydon brackets that he refers to. Did Neil Reed or anybody else at Artelia, or indeed Claire Williams at the TMO for that matter, tell you that Rydon needed to improve its discipline in any respect?
When I took over the CM duties, part of that would have been some resolution of outstanding queries. And my recall being that it's not clear from the information provided what was required, which is why the question's been raised. Again, very straightforward, not unusual dialogue in a contract situation.
You say when I took over the CM duties, that's October 2015, is it?
Well, I introduced myself to the project. Simon gave due notice, which I think was 12 weeks. So I knew that Simon was going. That would be end of August, September time.
Yeah, but this is March, you see. That's
Yeah.
what I'm asking. So at this stage, you hadn't yet taken over as CM.
No.
So at this stage, when Simon Lawrence is still the contract manager,
Yeah.
do you know why Artelia had the impression that the discipline by Rydon needed to be improved? At least in the respect of resolution of queries and decisions.
No, I don't know.
You don't know. Whose responsibility at that stage, March 15, was it to deal with the resolution of queries, decisions, etc.?
That would be Simon's role to raise that with the client team.
I see. Did anybody from Artelia or the TMO come to you and complain that Simon Lawrence wasn't very disciplined in respect of his resolution of queries, decisions, etc.?
I can't recall.
Right. Can we look at ART 406629, please? This moves forward in the story by a month or so. This is an email from Neil Reid of Artelia to Claire Williams of the 9th of April 2015. And you're not copied in on it, but I just want to ask you about one or two things in it. He says, with my limited involvement to date, I hold a perception that, one, the scope of the work that Rydon is doing is not as well understood as it could be. There is significant email traffic of what is considered to be in the contract. The roles and responsibilities of all parties do not appear as clear to me as they could be. Processes for resident liaison, COW scope, architectural compliance monitoring, for example. New risks and issues are arising that need managing, mitigating, and for which financial provision is required in terms of build cost and consultant fee implications. And then he proposes a meeting, and the meeting objective to review the contract documents and scope of works, desired outcome, clarity on what is and is not included in the contract, and the implications arising. This would include Chwich and Lim and Simon from Rydon. I think that's not, and perhaps Simon from Rydon. Both are available should you agree. Did anybody raise with you at this time, early April 2015, the problem that Mr. Reid identifies in paragraph 1?
No, I don't think so.
What about issue 2 that he identifies? Did anyone raise with you the problem that Mr. Reid identifies there?
No, I don't recall that.
I think in your statement you say you received reports from managers on all matters of progress, including safety and whether the project was on time and to budget. Looking at item 3 in Mr. Reid's email, is it fair to say that that kind of issue fell squarely within the scope of what should have been brought to your attention through the process you've described?
Yeah, if there's items that are outside the scope of the contract. Or
I mean, can you explain how come you weren't aware at this time of the matters of complaint or complaint, the subject of paragraphs 1 and 2 of Mr. Reid's email?
I don't see them as complaint. I see them as an employer's agent who himself is new to the job. I don't see any issue about the scope of the work. I think it's good that there's a traffic of email clarifying exactly what is required. I don't see a problem with that at all. The roles and responsibilities of all parties do not appear as clear to me as they could be. That is a reference to the job as a whole, that Artelia are the project manager on behalf of the client for. So that seems to be they're criticising themselves. New risks and issues, you can only deal with them as and when they arise. And
wait a minute.
So I don't see that's an issue either.
All right, that's your answer on the substance. My question was whether anybody raised these matters with you at the time. Never mind about whether they're complaints or not complaints. Did anybody raise with you the matters identified in paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 at the time?
I don't think they did, and I don't see a reason for.
Well, can we look at ART 406657? This is an email sent after a meeting which appears to have taken place on the 17th of April 2015 from Nick Valente of Artelia to Simon Lawrence, Claire Williams and Neil Reid, and it contains the same text as we saw before. At the top, meeting objective to review the contract documents and scope of works, desired outcome, clarity on what is and is not included in the contract and the implications arising. And that was the meeting that was held, and it looks as if this email is the one that follows the meeting. Were you aware at the time that matters had got to the stage where it was necessary to hold a meeting with Simon Lawrence with the express aim that there be clarity on what is and is not included in the contract?
Simon may have raised this with me, and that's exactly what I'd expect from the contracts manager to be doing.
Had anyone expressed to you that there was no clarity on what is and is not included in the contract?
If Simon had raised that to me, that's what was occupying a great deal of his time doing, again, I'd see that as a perfectly reasonable situation, and him being part of the process to clarify exactly that.
Well, forgive me, Mr. Blake, but wasn't it Rydon's job as design and build contractor, who had responsibility for managing the process, among other things, of the performance of its subcontractors? Wasn't it Rydon's job to make sure that everyone who was involved in the project had clarity about their respective roles?
We have our role as principal contractor to be part of the team, and the employer's agent role is that's Artilier's responsibility. So that there's an ebb and a flow of information in that respect.
So are you saying that this was a concern for Artilier, but not a concern for Rydon?
This is demonstrating to me that the contract team is doing their job, asking the questions, clarifying, and understanding the contract. Because on these items here, there's an element of change that's been accommodated that is part of the TMO's choices.
Did it not come as a surprise to you to discover from Mr. Lawrence that anyone from Rydon should need to be invited to a meeting such as this with your client concerning what is and is not included in the contract over a year after Rydon had been appointed?
No, I think that's a perfectly reasonable circumstance.
Really? Do you know what led Mr. Reed to take the step that he did and to organise this meeting?
For the reasons that he's identified in his previous email.
Can we go to ART 406681, please? This is an email that Mr. Reed sent Mr. Lawrence on the 10th of July 2015, copy to the TMO. And I'm sorry, you're being shown page 1. I'd like page 3, please, of that string. Thank you. Yes, that's the page. Now, it says, Simon, I understand that we have moved no further forward on the below since your team's meeting with Tweetchen. I'd like to request a meeting with you, your team and your director, next Friday morning, 17th July, to discuss how Rydon is planning to deal with the commercial service required, including the response awaited my email of 22nd of May. We remain disappointed not to have received a response from Rydon and have little option other than to escalate the issue. Please confirm that this is possible and who will attend. Meeting objective, to discuss the commercial status quo, lack of responsive / proactive commercial service from Rydon and how we can remedy the issues. Desired outcome, strategy agreed for resolving the issue with oversight from a Rydon director. Now, the director, first of all, must have been you, Mr. Blake, I imagine, yes?
Yes.
Were you ever told of Mr. Reed's request for this meeting?
I can't recall, but I would have hoped I would have done.
All right. In the light of Mr. Reed's desired outcome, including the perceived need for oversight from you, do you accept that by this stage, Mr. Reed had come to the view that the staff or the team presently working on the Grenfell project were not performing adequately?
I would say what specifically they're not performing against. If it's requests for financial information in respect of changes, then if the team is occupied doing other things, then that commercial or that advice may take longer than Neil would expect. We have a finite resource, and that's how it would be allocated.
I mean, it's clear from this email that Mr. Reed was not satisfied with Rydon's performance. Specifically, he thought there was a lack of responsiveness and proactive commercial service. Was the fact that he had those opinions of Rydon's performance at this stage brought to your attention?
I can't recall if that was sent to me or not.
Well, we can't see you copied in. It's sent to Simon Lawrence. Let me ask the question one more time. Did Simon Lawrence raise with you the fact that Mr. Reed had formed a view of Rydon's performance in that it was not sufficiently responsive or proactive in the way that Mr. Reed has set out there?
I can't recall, but I expect that I would have been.
What did you do about it?
Well, it seems that I'm being invited to a meeting, but I don't know whether that happened or not.
Do you remember going to a meeting with Mr. Reed and discussing the matters which were on his mind?
I don't recall.
Looking at this email, at least, do you accept that Artelia, at least by this time, considered that there was a serious issue regarding Rydon's responsiveness on the project that required to be dealt with by someone at your seniority?
That certainly says that, yes. So
now, if we move up the email chain, we can see Zach Maynard's response. He's copied in on this email, but he is the one who is sent in to respond, so to speak. And he responds on the 13th of July, back to Neil Reed and Simon Lawrence. And this one is copied to you. As you can see, you're the last copyee on it, so you can see it. When you got this email from Zach Maynard, did you look at what it was he was responding to?
I may have done. I haven't got a recall of this.
So by the 13th of July and the time when Zach Maynard came to respond, you must have realised that Neil Reed wasn't happy with Rydon's service and that he wanted a meeting with you.
When I received this, yeah.
Yeah. And you could see that Zach Maynard's response includes the statement at the end of the second line there, that it doesn't appear that a meeting is necessary, and there's very little information outstanding. Was that your view?
I can't recall this, so I can't confirm that.
Did you discuss Mr. Maynard's response to Mr. Reed before he sent it? Do you remember?
I don't know.
Would it be usual for you to do so, given that you essentially had been identified as the person to go to a meeting?
I'm relying here on Zach's response. He's holds a senior position, and it seems that he's responded in detail to the items raised. I would be always willing and available to meet any of the project team. So that's a given in my role.
Can I ask you to go to ART 406206, please? This is an email I think we looked at before from Simon Cash to Neil Reid on the 1st of October 2015. This is the one about your relationship with Peter Madison going back a long way. We looked at that yesterday afternoon, Mr. Blake. Can I ask you this time to look at the end of the fourth line down? Where it says, Peter fully appreciates what we're doing and is very supportive of our approach. What we did agree was that he and I would meet with Steve next week to have an offline chat to review the overall situation and try and explain that no one is threatening Rydon's or trying to be aggressive, but rather we're trying to guide them as to what they need to do to sort themselves out. Hopefully this might make Steve open up a little more than when he is in meetings where he feels under threat and is therefore less forthcoming. Peter reiterated that the key for him is still budget, then quality, and finally time. There is a huge political agenda sitting over him, and what he needs us to do is to ensure that he does not get strung up as a result of reporting things that turn out not to be true. I just want to focus on the end of the first paragraph there. Do you remember whether that meeting took place?
I do know that we had a meeting. So that date is December 15. October 15.
Yes, I'm sorry, it is. It's October 15, yes. It's American dating, but it is October 15.
I remember at the end of the contract, part of the conclusion of any contract is to put a final account proposal to the client. We also have to put in the notices to regularise the contract with respect to the time finish, and we need to get paid against our application. So at that point in time, which was October 15, which is running up to the conclusion of the contract, we hadn't had. I think there's one extension of time granted, but there was a huge, quite a significant disparity in terms of that award and the projected end of the contract. So that gave us a liability. We had a final account that wasn't agreed, and that was putting pressure on the cash flow of the project. And the response from Artelier was that you're not entitled to any of this. So that was putting us into a, for want of, it was a stressed position.
Can we look at pages 2 and 3 of this email string? And I'd like to have pages 2 and 3 put up next to each other. This is the email to which the one I've just been showing you is a response, and it's dated the 27th of September 2015 from Neil Reid to Simon Cash. So it's internal at Artelia. And its subject is sit rep following visit Thursday 24th September 2015. And I just want to focus on 2 paragraphs in it. First of all, paragraph 2, please, where it says, since the meeting, the COW's report that further and ongoing delays (brackets cladding) brackets mean that there is little confidence in completion being achieved in January 2016. I believe February is looking more tenable based on the delays in September, but this may worsen should significant progress not be achieved in the coming 2 weeks. The COW continue to flag quality control related problems, which I'm concerned Rydon is not closing expediently. That SB and SL simply need to do better to work with the COW and resolve the quality issues being raised. And then just looking at page 3 in paragraph 5, please. It refers to a handover completion, a kick-off meeting on the 24th of September. And it goes on in the second line, and this was a little frustrating, as much of what had been discussed, agreed and minuted at the progress meeting was revisited and clarified. A completion strategy was discussed briefly, and a further meeting will be organised with stakeholders on or around 8th October. This is to allow 2 to 3 meetings to take place prior to completion, anticipated to be achieved no earlier than January. It will serve as a forum in which to define success, agree the deliverables, track and manage actions proactively, and ensure that Rydon provide the things it is obliged to provide under the contract. Rydon will be adopting what they describe as a trade approach to producing the information and will issue a tracker document ahead of the meeting to identify all the things it plans to provide. Artelia will issue an agenda and chair the meeting. And just looking at those two paragraphs out of a number in that letter, were you aware at this time, late September 2015, that Artelia thought that Rydon had to sort itself out in respect of quality, programme, costs and other matters I've just shown you?
Yeah, I'm aware of all those issues, yeah.
Did you agree that management of Rydon on this project needed to sort itself out, using those words in the at that time?
I don't agree with the statement "sort itself out." The employer's agent need to understand the reasons why things are that they're describing as they are.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Do you want to continue your answer?
Had you finished?
Had you finished?
Answer?
Well, the question was I aware of this? The answer is yes. My response to it is that that there's a lot of explanation as to why things were as they are, as they were. And I made mention of that in my previous answer, of the positions that we needed to achieve, which would be
Okay.
the time, money, and also everything that's needed to achieve PC at handover. So there's nothing in there that I disagree with.
All right, thank you.
Now, I want to move the story on a bit, if I may.
Are we going to another topic?
Not really, no.
No, all right. I'm just thinking that we're getting to that time when we might have...
Well, yes. Yes. We could take a break now. I'm perfectly happy to.
Might be a good time if it's not too...
Well, it's as good as any, Mr. Chairman, I think, probably.
Mr. Blake, we'll have a short break now. I think 10 minutes or so should be enough. So, usual rules, no talking about your evidence, please. And we'll come back at 20 past. 20 past 3, please. Good. Yes. Can we have Mr. Blake back, please? Right. Ready to carry on, Mr. Blake?
I am.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blake, can I ask you to go to RYD 30444349, please? I'd like you to look at page 2 in that, and look at the middle of the page. This is an email from Simon Lawrence dated the 22nd of June 2015 to James Clifton, Zach Maynard, attaching invoices for Andy Hannibus and his supervisory works at the tower. Now, if we look at the top of page 2 with me, Mr. Blake, you can see that Mr. Maynard passes this to you directly to say that Mr. Hannibus's rate had been reduced, but he was still on site. You see that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the context. Now, I'd like to turn to page 1 and look at the middle. You emailed Mr. Lawrence there to say, the gift of timing, this is burning a hole in our pockets. Can we reduce this to once a month? Catch up. What did you mean by this is burning a hole in our pockets?
This is a guy that we employed to help with the M&E install. There was presumably an allowance made in the budget that we were overspending against.
In what regard did Mr. Lawrence need to catch up?
Well, I've asked him a question. Can we reduce this to once a month? Catch up.
What do you mean by catch up?
Talk about it.
Right. Oh, I see. You're not telling him to catch up with the project. You're telling him that you want to meet him and discuss it.
Yes.
I see. Now, let's look at the top of the page for Mr. Lawrence's response. And I want to focus on the first paragraph. He says, not that I disagree with the fact Stuart is costing us money, so probably over budget. However, it disappoints me that Zach has sent this to you without talking to me. If I had actually seen any budget for Grenfell in the last 8 months at least, then we may have been able to manage this differently. Did it surprise you to learn that Mr. Lawrence had not seen any budget for Grenfell in the previous 8 months at least?
Yeah, the budget is available at any time for a contracts manager if they wish to look at it. It's on the system, and it's available for him to see and use.
Did it surprise you to learn that Mr. Lawrence had not seen any budget for Grenfell in the previous 8 months?
Yeah, but again, as I'd say, it's available. If he wanted to see it, he's just got to ask for it.
Did you go back to Mr. Lawrence and say, why have you not seen a budget for this project for 8 months at least? It's on the system. Explain yourself.
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
Because I didn't see a need to.
You didn't see a need to take him up on the fact that your contracts manager had not seen a budget for this project for 8 months. Why is that?
I didn't take that up with him.
No, I know. I'm just seeking to really understand why you let that go.
Because it's available for him, so he doesn't need to be shown it. He can find out for himself.
We go on in the email. He says, at the moment we have a poorly performing site, which is mainly but not totally caused by poor surveying and cheap, incompetent subcontractors. Did you agree with Mr. Lawrence's evaluation of Rydon's subcontractors as cheap and incompetent, Mr. Blake?
No, I mean, I see this as a point in time against a frustrated man. doing his job with a lot of activities going on at the same time, and yeah, he's obviously frustrated, so he's venting that with me.
Does that tell us that you didn't agree with him that the subcontractors were cheap and incompetent? You thought they were expensive and competent, did you?
That's his view at a point in time. I didn't have a view about that.
You didn't have a view about whether the subcontractors, in the opinion of your contract manager, were or weren't cheap and incompetent?
I didn't at that time, no. I wasn't on site.
Did it not?
I know that due process is run through in order to appoint those subcontractors, which the contracts manager is part of that process. If there is issues of performance, then part of the contracts manager's role is to bring them to account, and so that they fulfil their obligations as they're employed. If they can't manage to do that, then they will be removed from the contract.
When you received this email, did you take any steps to ensure that quality was being maintained on this project?
I can't recall what I would have done specifically.
Did you supervise on an ongoing basis thereafter whether quality was being delivered on this project?
Did I do what, sorry?
Did you supervise on an ongoing basis whether the process of overseeing the quality delivered by subcontractors was being properly delivered?
I didn't supervise on a regular basis, no.
Here is your contract manager alerting you to the fact that he thought that the subcontractors were cheap and incompetent. As a result of being told that, did you do anything to look for yourself to see whether there was anything in what Mr. Lawrence was saying to you?
I can't recall exactly what I did, so I can't make a statement.
In the second paragraph, penultimate line, he says, "We still have no competent manager to deal with M&E issues." Did you agree that Rydon had no competent manager dealing with M&E issues at this time?
No, because that's what the employee of Stuart Hannibus was there for.
So not your problem? Is that what you're telling us?
It's all my problem.
Yes. So given that you're told by your contracts manager that you've got no competent manager to deal with the M&E issues, my first question was, do you agree?
I don't know. I don't know.
Did it not concern you?
Of course it concerns me. It's a very negative email of a state of affairs from a contracts manager.
Given his concern, what steps did you take to ensure that M&E issues were properly managed by Rydon?
Yeah, and I can't recall what I did about it.
No. Can I ask you to look at a document, TMO 00859-230. This is 1st of October 2015. And it's an email from Neil Reed to Claire Williams, responding to her email of the 1st of October 2015. That's the context. And he refers to a meeting, last week's meeting. And in the, you can see there's a list of 5 points. And in the point 4, he says, agree, but little else we can do other than monitor situation at present. And he says this: last week's meeting were hard work with Steve Blake, progress and the follow-up on Tuesday, as his general approach seems to be to kick things back without taking ownership of things that clearly sit with Rydon. Would you agree that that was a fair observation or description of your attitude at this time, Mr. Blake?
I don't know what point 4 is referring to.
Well, if you want, we can look at the email to which it's a response. Let's do that. Page 2, item 4, please. Email Claire Williams to Neil Reid, 1st of October. Rydon Resources. I'm still not convinced that Rydon have enough resource to manage the scheme to the end. Steve Blake's day or two a week does not give the existing site management team a lead. Morale is dropping, I believe, so I'd like to push this point with Rydon too, at the site meeting as well as generally. So that's point 4. That's the context. And I'll ask the question again. Okay. I'll ask the question again. And the question was, would you agree that the observation made at paragraph 4 by Mr. Reid about your attitude was a fair one?
No, I don't. No.
Are you surprised to read that Artelia perceived you at the time as not taking ownership of things that clearly sit with Rydon?
I'd be disappointed. That's not my style.
Do you say that Mr. Reid's view of you was unjustified?
To make that comment, yes, I would. Yes.
All right. I just want to ask you a question or two about handover from Mr. Lawrence to you as contract manager. ART 406706, please. This is an email from John White, a clerk of works, working for John Rowan and Partners. It's ART 406706. Thank you. And it says, I'd give you the date. It's the 5th of October, 2015, Mr. Blake, just so you're clear about the dating. And in the second line, Mr. White tells Miss Williams, just sent my report. Not good reading, I'm afraid. Simon from Rydon's needs to start handing over all the duties to his replacement ASAP, and Rydon's needs to get the cladding contractor up to their labour immediately. Now, I know you weren't copied in on this, obviously, at the time. My question is, when Mr. Lawrence left Rydon in October 2015, was there a handover of his responsibilities to you as the incoming contract manager?
Yes, there was, yeah.
Was there a handover pack of documents for you to read?
No.
What did the handover entail, if you can tell us briefly?
I would obviously spend amount of time with Simon discussing the job. We discussed it during the process of our normal exchange as director contracts manager, and then I would make myself familiar with the information to administer the contract. And by way of example, I would start with the site meeting minutes, which identifies actions for Rydon to do.
Does that tell us that you didn't start by looking at all the individual contracts?
No, I wouldn't do that.
So a contracts manager coming into the job wouldn't look at the contracts. Is that normal?
The job is in progress, so I would only refer to them if there was a need for me to do that.
Right. Going to another document, this is ART 406662, page 2, please. This is an email from Tony Batty. He's of Silcock Dawson, and this is an email from him to Claire Williams and others on the 6th of November 2015. Can I just show you that? Mr. Batty says that the properties these are voids for inspection, and he identifies them, 145, 136 and 124 there. And he says, in summary, that the properties have not been made ready for inspection, And underneath where it says Chris Holt, the site manager, and I think what's happened here is that this is a response to an earlier email. Under that it says, clearly we cannot continue like this. When we inspect the occupied flats and something needs to be done, Rydons should be inspecting and signing off the flats, and then capital letters before the COWs. Now let's turn over to page 1 for Mr. Reed's response. He comes back to Tony Batty on the 6th of November 2015 on this subject. Thanks for this. And then in the third paragraph he says, Claire, either way, this is shoddy management by Rydon of our team's time and effort, and I would urge you to elevate this to Peter for his discussions with Steve. This demonstrates again that Rydon must do better. I hold a perception from their inaction here that they are apathetic to our efforts to help and need to be far more proactive in getting work complete and right first time. Do we need a high-level meeting to discuss the new elephant in the room? I don't think I need to ask you about that. My question is, were the concerns that Mr. Reed is reflecting in this email here about shoddy management of Rydon and apathy ever raised with you at this time, early November 2015? This is the time when you just come in as contracts manager.
Well, it doesn't appear that I've seen this email. My introduction to the contract would be to focus on the critical path parts of the contract, and that didn't include this element of work. So my focus was to apply all my energy into the first part of that, of getting items of work in place and finalised in order to produce the best finishing point for the programme, and this work is not part of that critical path. So I've arranged the management thus, and I could have explained that to the client, but I didn't, and we certainly weren't apathetic to any efforts for help, and that was my recall of my introduction into the programme. And if my attitude towards that criticism, they may have seen that I was focusing on other things.
Mr. Begg, I'm sorry to cut you off. You may have misunderstood my question. My question was a very short one. Did anybody raise the concerns I've shown you in this email with you at the time?
No, but there was they were,
right.
When I came into the contract, there was an awful lot of change. There was many obstacles to progress that was going on simultaneously. We had client change, we had access to flats, we had 2 contractor insolvencies, so there was an awful lot of simultaneous event. In terms of my prioritising, the voids work, if it suffered as a consequence, would be the reason why it did.
Can I ask you to look? I'm just going to do one more document on this, I think. Can I ask you to look at ART 406672, please? This is an email from Mr. Reed to Simon Cash, among others, of the 9th of May 2016. So we've jumped forward in time. And I appreciate, Mr. Blake, that there was an awful lot that happened between the autumn of 15 and the May of 16. I just want to show you this email. This is an email you didn't see at the time. It's internal to Artelia. And he says this: Simon, the O&Ms are unacceptable to the COWs. This is to flag that this is becoming a farce. Despite all our efforts to ensure a smooth landing, I have to say I do not think I have ever worked with a contractor operating with this level of nonchalance. We're all getting sucked into doing far more than we ought at this stage of the project. I'm wondering if you need to write to the TMO to express our concern and what we are endeavouring to do about it. Additional site visits, additional meetings, endless emails on design-related issues that don't concern us, as clear as the design lead, etc., challenging the contractor, etc. I just want to focus very narrowly on the words, I don't think I've ever worked with a contractor operating with this level of nonchalance. My question to you is that a fair criticism of Rydon at this time?
I've been called many things, but nonchalant is not a word that's been used. I absolutely don't accept that.
Did either Artelia or the TMO accuse you directly of nonchalance, as we see here?
No, they didn't.
I'm going to return to a different topic altogether, which is CDM regulations. Did you take any steps yourself to satisfy yourself that the health and safety file had been properly produced and handed to the TMO at the end of the project?
The way that was arranged is that the agreement was that the information contained within the O&M manuals would be used by the TMO to populate the health and safety manual.
We've heard evidence from Mr. Hughes that Rydon never received the final copy of the O&M manual following handover. Did you know that at the time?
I didn't know that at the time, no.
Can I ask you to go to MET 4066178, please? This is an email chain between Steve Butler of All Group Holdings, you, Claire Williams, Neil Reed and others, dated the 6th of June 2016. And I just want to focus on the second email on that page, which is to you. Steve Butler says, I'm also producing... You see that? I can't quite see that.
Which bit do you want, Mr. Millett?
Let's move on from that then. I'm not sure is the answer. My question, I think, is, did you understand whose responsibility it was to produce the health and safety file?
Yes.
Whose?
That was it previously lay with the CDMC, with our obligation to provide the information to be part of its compile. So that's always the case in any job. And then we were approached to say, would we take over that role, which we didn't. And then Artelia and or the TMO, it was reported that they would take the responsibility for that obligation, with us providing the information for the health and safety file through the content of the O&M.
Can I ask you to look at the document again, please? It's gone off, I think, from the screen, but it's MET 3066178. And just go, please, to what I was looking for, which I couldn't see, which is the very top of page 2. He says, I'm also producing a health and safety, an H&S file from the information I already have, as the client doesn't seem to think it's their responsibility under the CDM regs. It is. My question is, had the need for a health and safety file been discussed before this time? and this is June 2016.
Yeah, I think it was part of the handover discussions. We had a separate set of minutes and meetings with respect to identifying everything required to meet handover.
When you say handover, you mean handover to the TMA?
Achieving practical completion.
Right. Yes. My question, I'm sorry, I don't think you answered it. My question is, had the need for a health and safety file been discussed before early June 2016? Or was this the first time that it was being discussed?
My response was, I think that it was, and the medium for that discussion was at those meetings.
Right. When do you think the discussion of the completion of the health and safety file started?
I can't recall exactly.
Right. Did you raise any concerns with Artelia or the TMO about the timing of the preparation of this health and safety file, as at this time, early June 2016?
No, I didn't know.
Okay. Can I ask you a number of brief questions about building control? In brief terms, Mr. Blake, what involvement did you have with building control prior to your taking over the role of contracts manager in October 2015?
I don't think I had any contact with them.
What about after?
Afterwards, yes.
Now, we've heard that there was no formal method for recording, other than emails perhaps, what drawings were sent to building control. In the absence of a formal tracker, how did you yourself, after October 2015, take steps to satisfy yourself that building control had everything they needed?
Yes, I did, yeah.
How did you go about that?
By contacting Studio E.
Right. Who did you contact at Studio E?
I can't recall who it was. Most probably Neil Crawford.
Was there an occasion you recall when you contacted Studio E and asked them that question?
I remember contacting them to make sure that they had submitted all the available information to building control.
What was the occasion on which you sought that assurance?
That was me making sure that everything necessary to gain building control approval had been sent to building control via the architect.
Yes. What was the occasion?
That's
what triggered it?
That's part of my job to make sure that that's happening.
Do you remember when it was?
I can't recall.
Did you do it more than once?
Possibly, but I know that I did it to say to them that their responsibility is to submit that information to building control.
When you say they, you mean Studio E?
Yes.
Did Studio E ever come back to you after that and say, we've done it, and explain to you what they had done?
No, I do remember from that meeting that they confirmed to me that they hadn't sent the structural engineers' drawings to them. So I got that reminded of them that was their obligation to do that, which I understand that they did.
When you say you contacted Studio E to tell them that their responsibility was to submit information to building control, how did you make that contact?
That would have been a phone call.
A phone call, no email?
No.
Was it not an important thing to record in writing that you had done?
If it's important, I start with a phone call.
Why didn't you follow it up with an email?
Because they must have satisfied me that they indeed done it,
Right.
and agreed to do it.
Okay. And that was enough for you, was it?
I can't recall whether there was a confirmation back from Studio E saying that they submitted the details.
So your answer a few lines ago was that they must have satisfied me that they had indeed done it and agreed to do it. What did they tell you? That they would do
can't
it, or
recall.
that they had done it?
I can't recall exactly what was said.
No. Are you aware that there were certain inaccuracies in the information provided to building control? Certain gaps?
No.
Were you ever concerned that building control didn't have the structural drawings prior to you finding out about it?
Yeah, because they could come back and say this is this is not compliant, and then we may have to make alterations. So yes, I was.
Did that not alert you to the fact that perhaps Studio E were not fully au fait with what they had to provide to building control?
It didn't make me think that they didn't know that they had to do it. It just highlighted that they hadn't done it, and then from that point, like I say, that's my role to make sure that the building control had sufficient information to issue a compliance certificate.
Was that not something that you thought you ought to monitor on a continuing basis?
Yeah, but monitoring is part of our role, yeah.
Did you ever have occasion, given the lapse you had found about the structural drawings, to go back and make sure Studio E had continued to provide building control with up-to-date and accurate and complete information about drawings and materials?
That was my understanding. That was the only item that hadn't been provided.
Right.
Thereafter, I met the building control, so I had a face-to-face meeting with them.
Did you know that the drawings that Studio E provided to building control showed that the rain screen was zinc?
I didn't know that, no.
Can you explain how that lapse occurred?
The drawings that were constructed were the Harley drawings as a specialist subcontractor. So for me, that's the precedent drawing. So it wouldn't have concerned me had that note on the architect's drawing been different. It's obviously not ideal, but like I say, the drawing is Harley's.
I just want to go back to ask one or two further questions about the health and safety file. Did you do any checks yourself to determine if all group holdings were competent and able to produce a compliant health and safety file?
We'd employed them before to fulfil that function, and that's what their business is. So I would think it perfectly reasonable to employ them to do that.
Did you understand yourself what needed to go into a health and safety file?
I've got previous experience of O&Ms and health and safety files, so I know pretty much, yeah.
Was it not your job, Rydon's job, to maintain or compile the health and safety file throughout the project and not just at the very end?
Yeah, you collect information on the way, and then it's presented at the end of the contract. So
To the best of your recollection, was information for the health and safety file compiled as a health and safety file along the way?
Well, the drawings would be exactly that, yes.
What about other things in the health and safety file?
Well, most things conclude at the end, so in terms of electrical certs and commissioning certs, completions all generally come at the end of the project. So I don't think that that's an unreasonable point in time to assemble it.
Did you check the health and safety file once it had been produced?
The health and safety file was for the client. The O&Ms were produced, and I didn't check them myself, no.
Why is that? Do you know?
I didn't see a need to.
Who at Rydon was responsible for checking the health and safety file on handover?
Again, we've employed someone who does that for a living, so I wouldn't check the finite detail of what they've assembled, and that's presented to the client for their acceptance. So that would be, I wouldn't see a need to do that.
You wouldn't see a need to do that. Does that mean that you would not see a need on the part of anybody at Rydon to check that all group holdings had done a proper job before handing the health and safety file to the client?
I wouldn't check it in finite detail. So that they're employed to do that on our behalf.
Now, it seems that Rydon only received a draft of the O&M manual and never received a final version. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, no.
Can you explain why you didn't know that?
I didn't know that because all group holdings didn't tell me that.
Right.
What I do know is that I made arrangements for all group holdings to meet with the TMO to agree the content, to agree the referencing that would be applied to the pages so that it fitted into the TMO system of records. That was the purpose of putting the two people together, and so that everything that is required under the health and safety obligation was provided via the O&M manuals that we submitted.
Mr. Chairman, I've got one more self-contained topic, but I'm looking at the time, and the topic won't take very long. I can't guarantee how long, I'm afraid. But
when you say not very long, are we talking 5 or 10 minutes?
Yes. Well,
Then I think we'll carry on.
I'm grateful, thank you. I want to ask you about residents and complaints. Can I ask you, first of all, please, to see RYD 3062813. This is part of an email exchange between you and Claire Williams on the 22nd of December 2015. And this is in the context of the departure of one of your staff members or team members. And in Claire Williams's email to you, I should perhaps show you John White's email, actually, first of all, to David Hughes and to you below it. And John White says he's disappointed that Chris is leaving. He's been the one that has brought all the internal handovers together and a fundamental part of its success. I do think that with nearly 100 flats to hand over, his loss will no doubt affect the smooth running of the future handovers. And in the end, or at the end, he says, I feel his departure would jeopardise Rydon's ability to finish the contract successfully. And then Claire Williams comes on to you on the same day and says, Steve, I was on site this morning and picked up the news about your proposal to move Chris. I would like to ask you to reconsider this decision, as Chris has, as clerk of our works, phrased below, the trust of our residents. He's conscientious and personable and a good person for the resident interface. And then it goes on, our clerk of work has reported that people welcome Linda and Chris by name into their flats, and we need this goodwill to keep the project moving to a satisfactory conclusion. I'm aware only through negotiation has Chris been able to get work undertaken where residents have been ambivalent or difficult. I would not underplay this skill. The Grenfell project team has already been through a lot of changes, and the continuity of staff plus the positive attitude of both Chris and Dave is, to me, imperative to the project. Please ring me. Did you respond to Claire Williams regarding your decision to take Chris off the project?
If she'd asked me to ring, I would have rung, yeah, but I can't remember what I would have said.
How important was it to structure your team in a way which gave residents trust and confidence in Rydon?
It's of course it's good to see a positive email. So that's part of the job in occupied environments.
Did you consider or take steps to bring another resident liaison officer or member onto site to familiarise themselves with the residents and their various concerns and vulnerabilities?
Bring another one in?
Yes.
Linda was there for the duration.
Yes. You decided to take Chris off the project. Did you consider taking any steps to replace it with someone with equivalent skills?
They all have that skill set to work in that environment.
Can I ask you to look at another document, RYD 3090775, please? This is an email you sent to John Heggs at JS Wright on the 24th of February 2016. It says a number of things in it, and then it said, had residents meeting last night, so pain is to be shared. Can you just explain, what do you mean by the pain caused by the residents meeting?
The note there, basically the HI is there's a trap on this, let's call it a boiler, and on a windy day it basically vibrates, so that has to be that had to be remedied. So that was feedback from the residents meeting. So you, the plumbers, need to come up with a solution.
Did they?
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Were the residents happy?
Yes.
How many of these residents' meetings did you personally attend?
I didn't go to many residents' meetings. I would always be available if requested. The invite came from the TMO. That's part of my role to attend residents' meetings, and I would expect to do that.
Can I ask you to look at RBK 30s 27309? And this is a set of Artelia minutes from the meeting on the 1st of April 2014. We can just see there. It's the same minute we looked at before. It's the 1st of April contract induction meeting or introduction meeting. And we know you were there from that because we looked at it earlier. Can I ask you please to go to paragraph 6.1? Which you'll find on page 4. And under the heading Resident Liaison, it says it was agreed that CS can begin resident profiling. And CS, I think, is Christina Stefanou. Is that right?
Yep.
And CS is in the column. What was Christina Stefanou's role on this project?
She was helping Linda
I see. And you can see that she was given this task of profiling the residents of Grenfell. What did profiling the residents entail? Do you remember?
Um, I, I'm not actually familiar with that word profiling, but I would imagine that means basically getting a contact name and number for them.
What was the purpose of that process? Do you remember?
That's so that access can be arranged as and when work and survey, etc., to arrange access into their home.
Do you remember whether it involved looking at individual mobility difficulties, whether people were partially sighted, any health issues, or anything of that nature, on an individual by individual basis?
Not specifically. As part of the there'd be an introduction meeting to, should the resident want it, to describe the works that are planned to be carried out. If the resident had any concerns, or if there was any reasons why the work couldn't be carried out, then the resident liaison officer would bring that back to the TMO, and there would be a accommodation made of the individual's needs, and that's how I would describe that.
Right, thank you. Mr. Blake, for the time being, I've come to the end of my questions. I'm going to ask the chairman for a break now, but it may be necessary to come back and for you to come back and answer some further questions. I just need to check my notes. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Blake, we normally have a short break at this stage, even though the council think they've asked all the questions. A bit of a review sometimes displays that they haven't. So we'll break now until 4:20. Will that give you long enough?
Yes, that should be enough.
Well, if not, you can let me know.
Yes, thank you.
So if you could be ready to come back at 4:20, we'll resume then, and you can go with the usher now, if you would, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to say 20 past. If you need more time, just let me know.
I'm grateful, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, would you ask Mr. Blake to come back, please? Right. Mr. Blake, I'm sorry we kept you waiting longer than I suggested. I think maybe there were more things to sort out than I'd originally thought. But we're ready to go on if you are.
Yes, Mr.
Will
Chairman.
you have some more questions?
I do have some more questions I have prepared to ask. I'm also still, I am told by one set of core participants waiting for further questions. I'm not sure whether they're follow-up questions or not, and I should wait to see them. But let me see how I get on. I don't have very many questions to ask. I want to ask you about an email at HAR 30175338, please. And this is an email from Emma Kelly at Rydon, sent to David Hughes. Sorry, sent to the Baileys, actually, but copied to David Hughes. Urgent update, Grenfell Tower windows. And Emma Kelly, who's a maintenance coordinator, as you'll probably know, this is January 2017, so this is after practical completion by quite a few months, says, it has been noted that there is a large number of defects relating to windows open on our system, some of which have been open as long as August. This is not acceptable, and we are not receiving any response from our chaser emails / calls. We must ensure that defects are closed out within the target rectification time provided. Please ensure we're provided with a thorough update by close of play today. Failure to do this will result in the issue being escalated. And then there's a list of different flats in Grenfell Tower. Do you see that? And some other, and some descriptions of the outstanding defects. My question is, were you aware at this time, January 2017, of the poor quality of the windows as expressed by Ms. Kelly in this email?
If she'd sent that to me, then I would be aware.
Well, you're not copied in
No.
on the email, as I think I pointed out to you.
Yeah.
But in general terms, were you aware of the poor quality of the windows, the subject of this message?
I'm not. It doesn't appear that I was aware of that list of defects.
Well, it doesn't appear from this email. I quite accept that, Mr. Blake. My question was, other than this email, did you have an awareness from another source that so many of these flats had defects relating to windows which were still open and unresolved and had been unresolved since August? Or in many cases.
I don't recall.
Right. At the time, were you generally concerned about the quality of the installation of the windows?
No.
Had you had similar experiences on other refurbishments, such as that which is identified here in this message? When I say you, I mean Rydon generally.
It's not unusual for window defects to come through on the reports. It would be helpful to see what the descriptions are on the report itself. But if you do have tilt and turn windows, sometimes you can get issues with them not being operated correctly, or the mechanisms themselves sticking or such. So over a period of time, it wouldn't be unusual for an amount of defects like those to be reported through the defects liability period.
I want to ask you about the O&M manual and the H&S health and safety file. can you please be shown ART 406185? Now, these are the notes of progress meeting number 17, Mr. Blake, which took place on the 17th of November 2015. And we can see that Mr. Madison, Mr. Gibson and Ms. Williams were there, as were you from Rydon, and a long list of other people from Rydon. Do you remember that meeting?
Not specifically, no.
No. Can I ask you to turn, please, to the bottom of page 2 of this minute and look at item 2.8, and it goes over to the top of page 3, and it says, item 3.2, CDM Regulations 2015, AM noted the PMN on previous minutes. That's a PMN is a post-meeting note, I think, isn't it?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yes. Copied here for completeness, PMN, under the 2015 regulations, if the PD appointment finishes before the end of the works, then the principal contractor takes on the PD role. This means the principal contractor puts together the H&S file for the client for discussion at the next progress meeting. Now, PD stands for Principal Designer. Did you understand that that was what was meant?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Yes. Do you accept that this was the arrangement identified here that was agreed with the TMO to prepare the health and safety file and then present it completed to the TMO, and not simply to provide the O&M manuals?
No, the agreement is that the O&M manuals would contain the information necessary to be put into the health and safety file for the TMO having inherited the role of principal designer.
Well, let's just look on. It was agreed, says the note, that Rydon are not the PD, principal designer, under the CDM Regulations 2015. The TMO as the client are to undertake this role. It was further agreed that Rydon would be responsible for collating and presenting the H&S file in accordance with the employer's requirements and the PCI, and present to the TMO as PD. Do you accept that that was the arrangement that was agreed with the TMO? Now I've shown it all to you, which is that Rydon was to prepare the health and safety file in its entirety and present it to the TMO.
To present the information required for it.
Well, it doesn't say that. It says presenting the health and safety file information in accordance with the employer's requirements. If you go back to the bottom of page 2, we can see it all in its context.
Well, my understanding is by doing exactly what I described fulfills that responsibility.
I see. So, just to be clear, when we see the words, Rydon would be responsible for collating and presenting the H&S file information
Exactly.
in accordance with the employer's requirements, it was your understanding that you wouldn't be compiling and presenting the complete file, but only the information to go into it.
Exactly that.
I see. Who was then responsible for completion of the health and safety file, if not Rydon?
That's the client has taken that responsibility from the change of the CDM regulations. Prior to that, it was Artelier's role.
Were all group holdings instructed by Rydon to complete the health and safety file itself and provide a complete version to you for passing on to the TMO, or only to compile the information to go into it, which is the distinction I think you're drawing based on this document?
The brief is to collect the information for the O&M, and part of the reason for the putting the two people together, the TMO and the compiler, was to agree the exact brief and format of how that information would be presented.
Mr. Blake, I've got one final question for you, and it's a question I I ask some witnesses who come to the inquiry. We've been through an awful lot of evidence over the last 2 days, and I'm grateful to you for helping me with it. Looking back on all that evidence and looking back on your involvement in the project as a whole, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Hindsight is a gift that none of us have. In the examination, it's very clear that at a point in time when I believed the presentation and acceptance of the windows and the cladding designs had been accepted to the satisfaction of through the design process and the submission and the exchange with building control. I believe this to be correct, and it haunts me that it was never that it wasn't challenged because it was believed to be correct.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Blake. Right. Mr. Blake, I've got no further questions. Mr. Chairman, no further questions.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Millett. Well, Mr. Blake, thank you very much for coming to give your evidence. It's been immensely helpful to us to hear what you have to say. I'm sorry it's gone on probably longer than you would have wished and longer this afternoon than we probably gave you to understand, but we are very grateful. And you're now free to go. Thank you very much. So, you'd like to go with the usher. Thank you, Mr. Millett. That's it for the afternoon.
Mr. Chairman, it is, and Miss Grange will take 2 further Rydon witnesses tomorrow.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. We'll rise now and sit at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
10 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.